Welcome to our last academic forum of the semester. Yay! Oh, now it's 2 time. We have some strange beeping happening today that we're not sure what it is. So sorry about the beeps. I'm saying this mostly for the recording because there's no one on Zoom yet, but in the room also there's some random beeping. So we may have a session or two, an academic forum extra, as it were, over the summer, but they're not regularly scheduled again until the end of August or beginning of September. So over the summer, just be on the lookout. They should be announced well ahead of time. It's not in this room. It's all over the building, or in the hallways at least. I heard it in Greek class. And I heard it just now in the lobby. So
Maybe it's the Russians.
yeah. So anyway, we will press on in spite of the beeping. And enjoy a bit of a break over the summer, except if we have any visiting people who might be interesting to speak, let me know. And we can have an academic forum extra. Or if you really desperately need to do a trial run of the paper, emergency paper delivery, we can organize, especially if it would be generally interesting. But before we get to the end of the semester, we do have one more speaker. Yay! Our own Steve Walter going to talk to us about an adventure in cross-cultural trading, which I think was a really lovely subtitle. So let me pray for us. Lord, thank you for rhythms of life and ends of semesters. Thank you that we have survived this far. Hooray! May we and the students survive the end of the semester equally well, and give Steve a good time today as he talks to us, so that we learn something more about how best to do what you've said. Thank you as well for the lunch and your master sharing. Christ. All yours.
Thank you all for coming. I wanted to say up front that this will be probably the least technical form that I have done. It will be quite descriptive, not too heavy. It's very du jour in the sense that it's still in process. The workshop that I'm talking about is still happening. In fact, I had conversations this morning with people who were involved in the workshop. So it's very ongoing. Nothing is finished. Well, not much is finished, especially in terms of application. So it's there's actually a mixed focus in the presentation. I'm talking about an experience, a training cross-cultural experience, and some of the characteristics of that experience. I'm talking about a particular type of instrument to do a particular task. And I'll also be talking about current affairs in the country where this event is taking place. Because they are of interest to us institutionally in a broad way. Particular interest to me because they focus on an area that I've done quite a bit of research in. So part of my motivation for sharing this is that I've participated over the last several years in the cross-cultural training seminar that Pete and Jim Wheatley have been doing, sharing experiences there. And well, I'll share some more experiences. Be nice if there were students here to listen in, but life is busy. So I understand. The context where this particular workshop is taking place, this training event, is the Philippines, a country that we're all quite familiar with. It's a linguistically diverse country. The ethnologue that I looked at, which is several years old, several editions back, said 175 plus languages. not sure what the plus refers to. The people that I'm interacting with in the Philippines gave me a list of what they consider to be relevant languages, and it had about 250 names on it. I think they are somewhat conflating language and location, talking about different communities, distinctive communities that exist in the country. The point here is it's a linguistically diverse country, and there's a lot of mobility within the country. So in urban areas especially, there's a lot of mixing. In any given classroom or school, you might find 3 or 4 or 5 different first languages spoken. So the teachers of the class confront that issue in terms of how well do any of those children speak whatever language or understand whatever language I use for instructional purposes. That's germane in this particular case, because the Philippines implemented a mother tongue instructional policy in 2012 for the entire country. Did it by fiat, left the implementation up to everybody at the local level. Virtually all of whom had no idea what to do, how to do it, when to do it, how it was going to work, who was going to provide materials, who was going to train the teachers. They were just told this has been mandated by the legislature, so you do it. So there has been a plethora of experiences. I've listened to some of the stories of school administrators, one of whom said, our school is located in a city, a well-known city in the Philippines. That city happens to be located in the geographical area referred to or assigned to the Ilocano language. And this person said, well, I don't have any kids at my school that speak Ilocano. In fact, what we're doing is teaching the kids Ilocano so that we can teach them Ilocano. Well, that obviously is not a very practical education. But it illustrated the sort of fairly extreme circumstances in which they find themselves. And then one of the persons that I'm interacting with, I'm doing a lot of interacting with people by Zoom. One of the persons I interacted with said, well, the capital city, and he's talking about a school that I think he's on the board or something like that. That in the capital city of Manila, Tagalog is the official or expected language of instruction. But the school that I'm part of is located in a section of Manila inhabited almost entirely by people from Mindanao who are Muslims and who speak a language that's found in Mindanao. So the school and the teachers are asking me, what do we do? And I found the similar sorts of stories as I've interacted with various education people in the country the last several months. I've been in dialogue with several groups of people, mostly professionals in the country, since January about what's going on in the country, what some of the issues and problems are. And a lot of this was brought into focus because there was an election, a presidential election last fall. And the new president obviously wants to shape affairs in the country according to his perspective. Doesn't matter that he's lived outside of the country for most of his life, but he has a perspective. He has a vice president who is the daughter of the outgoing president. And she has in the back of her mind, I'm going to run for president in 6 years. So I want to make my mark. So that's a little bit of the political background of circumstances in the country. And for the mother tongue policy, let me add a detail. They chose 19 languages out of the 175. mostly because they are the more widely spoken language in the country. Not necessarily because there had been linguistic work done, or because there was a dictionary, or that there were primers. It was a widely spoken language, or somebody of influence interceded on their behalf to put that language on the list. Any of those were possible explanations. The national language, so-called, somewhat of an artificial language, is called Filipino. Filipino is actually Tagalog, dressed in veneer syncretism. That is, they have borrowed some vocabulary into the language from other languages in the country and declared it to be the national language of the country. Tagalog is the language of power, the language of the capital city area. The fact that it was made the national language is not massively appreciated by a lot of other people in the country, but it is apparently a language of growing appreciation, growing utilization in the country. More and more people are learning the language as the years go by. The English is the official language. It's the language of government. It's the language of higher education. It's the language, it's a language of aspiration. Parents want their children to learn Tagalog or learn English because that gives them opportunities for access to higher education, to better positions of privilege, et cetera, et cetera. I asked one of the guys that I have been talking to, what is it about English in the context of the Philippines that makes it so attractive? And we talked for a little while, and I said, eventually, it sounds to me like it has sort of totemic standing in the Philippines. That is, this is something desired, perceived to have power. Nobody quite understands why or how, but it has that kind of a status. So people want English, they want their kids to have English, but it's not widely spoken as a first language in the country. They do publish some of the media in English, but if you go out into the streets and talk to people, you don't find a lot of people who speak English. The elite speak English, the well-educated speak English, more or less. And I'll say a little bit more about that when I get to the workshop. A lot of universities, a lot of educated people, a lot of people with PhDs and master's degrees, especially in the capital city. So there is a certain semblance of sophistication, of education, of technical expertise. But then a friend of mine, colleague, SIO colleague, who worked in the Philippines, told me, person said, I've always suspected that educated people in the Philippines don't share a lot of ideas or take a lot of initiative because they don't really want everybody else to know how much they don't know. Well, I kind of suspected that myself in interacting with people. It does indicate the prestige that English has. At the same time, it indicates that the education system, perhaps from technology on down, in a certain sense, provides a veneer for the country rather than being a fundamental engine or method of access to knowledge and technology. A lot of dissatisfaction with current educational outcomes. And I think one of the things that concerns a lot of people in the country is that all the dissatisfaction gets focused on the mother tongue policy. Just last night, I had a session with some of the folks there. And they said, well, this is what we're seeing now as the major issue that is coming to the fore and the sort of national dialogue or decision-making framework that's been set in place. we're going to get rid of the mother tongue education policy by blaming all the ills of education on the adoption of that policy in 2012. Probably not fair, almost certainly not fair, but that's the strategy of those who are really keen to promote English as the language of education in the country. Now, English has been been one of the languages of instruction for years and years. And there was dissatisfaction back then, before the mother tongue educational policy, with how well students were learning English in the public school system. So I suppose you could just say dissatisfaction is generic, maybe a part of the DNA in the country, but that is a part of the backdrop for the workshop that I'm going to talk about. Okay. Just after the election, which took place October, November, sometime then, the lower house of the legislature, they have a structure very similar to ours, passed the law, or I can't call it a law, they passed a referendum or a statement that the use of mother tongues and education in the Philippines should be terminated until such time as we're ready. That everybody's asking, well, what does that mean? And under what circumstances? What are the indicators? The statement of the lower house, it does not become law unless the upper house, Senate, actually confirms it or endorses it. And there's a lot of uncertainty about whether that will ever actually happen. But because this action was taken by the lower house, then people in the country who are really concerned about education and about mother tongue, or some combination of those, launched various processes of gathering information, strategizing, talking about the data that exists, how that data should be interpreted, what we should do, what should we do in response to the nationwide, I'll say, census or review process that has been launched. That conversation, and it's mostly, I would call it, I'll call them the elite in the country. One man was Minister of Education a few years back. Another man is probably a leading linguist in the country. Several people who are faculty members of various universities in the country. So it's a well-educated and knowledgeable group of people. They don't all share exactly the same perspective about what the issues are, what the problems are, how to proceed, but they share the sense or the belief that mother tongue is a good approach to education, especially given that we've tried virtually every other available strategy without particularly desirable results. So a lot of thinking, a lot of review of existing data, of existing research that's been done, a lot of brainstorming, and it's in that context that this idea about assessment of children and their proficiency in the language of instruction came up. Somebody was talking about the problem of children in their school saying that they were speakers of Tagalog or speakers of English or speakers of whatever language, but when you talk to them, they obviously don't speak the language very well. And the teachers are saying, well, the kids are not learning anything because they don't understand what I'm saying. So in that context, then, I made maybe an inadvertent recommendation. Well, here's an experience that I've had, an instrument that I produced, and here's how it was useful. So one of the guys jumped on that and said, well, let me talk about that with various institutions in the country that are wrestling with educational issues. And we'll see what they think. So he came back to me a couple weeks later and he said, they want to do it. will you be the resource person? So I said, okay, I'll be the resource person. I'd done it once before in East Timor. I reported on that a while back. But I had never previously trained people to do it. So, okay, now, here's my chance to train people to firm up, if you will, the processes involved, the analytical processes involved, what it's like to train local people and supervise them or mentor them in the process. So that was launched a couple months ago. And we are, let me move forward here. This is the why of why I suggested it. This slide I've shown before. But basically, the slide conveys the message based on empirical data that children's learning is very tightly related to the level of knowledge of the language that's used for instructional purposes. Like something that we pretty intuitively believe, but there's not actually been a lot of research on just how tight the relationship is between a person's level of proficiency and the actual learning outcomes. So I tested that in East Timor several years ago. And this graph is a result of that. So I shared it with the folks in the Philippines that I'm talking to, consulting with. And that they were reasonably convinced. And they said, okay, that looks pretty convincing to us. Let's try that. So we're trying it. So we launched this workshop. We had an exchange over what should be the content, how long it should run, what should be the output or the product. And we essentially agreed on the things which are listed on the slide. That is, it will run for, there'll be 10 participants. And in this particular case, the key person who put this all together on the Philippine side, has a lot of contacts with private schools in the country. The private school sector is reasonably large in the Philippines. So he said, well, let's work with them, because I know those people, I can recruit them to be a part of it, I can sell the idea to them. And they're all working in contexts in which they're facing a lot of this problem of children who don't speak the language of instruction. So they'll see the point. So he recruited them. I agreed to teach them. Together we worked out this training schedule. We'll have 4, which ended up being 6 sessions of an hour and a half each, in which I packed in all of the conceptual content of what the process is like to develop this instrument. And I'll show you a little bit about what it looks like, how to do it. Then we agreed there'll be 2 phases. The first part will be the conceptual part. And the second phase will be their implementation of everything that's included in the workshop to produce an instrument that they can use in their context to evaluate how well children speak the language of the school, the language of instruction in the school. Now, if all of this gets wiped out legislatively, it's hard to say how it will be used. But given the languages which were targeted in the development of the instrument, which are English, Tagalog, and Ilocano, the institutions involved will in fact be able to make use of it in the future. Not only will it be useful for helping teachers to identify the real level of proficiency in their classrooms, but also to monitor changes in that proficiency from year to year in the educational process. And since 2 of the instruments will be one in English and one in Tagalog, which are 2 languages used in all of the schools, it may turn out to be a nationally useful instrument for the education system nationally. The roles, I'm the workshop leader and the trainer. I'll probably also be the analyst for most the results. And Dr. DJ, he is the former Minister of Education. Those are the initials of his last name. A lot of people call him that. They just call him DJ. He's the coordinator, and he's the moving force on that end. I'm the moving force on the content end. He's the moving force on the application. And he is in personality and aptitude, a mover and a shaker. So presumably he's going to make things happen on that end. He's actually probably a little overly exuberant in that regard. Thought he may tread on a few sensibilities along the way, but he's the sort of guy who wants to see stuff get done. So I'm optimistic that that will actually happen. Okay, what's the instrument that they're going to develop? The objective is to be able to categorize the ability level of children in the language of instruction. And we're going to do this using essentially the same scale that's pretty widely used in language teaching processes in the US, and it's similar to the one in Europe. Has 6 levels, from level 0 to level 5. Level 0 means the person essentially has no knowledge of the language. And level 5 indicates a person who has native speaker proficiency in the language. The way the instrument will be put together is, well, let me back up 7. To actually do that on a person-by-person basis is a forbidding task. It would take a large amount of time with a classroom full of children to actually sit down with each child one by one, and interview them and conduct a conversation to arrive at a reasonable judgment about what their level of proficiency is. So instead of going through that process, we're going to develop an instrument that I'll show you what it looks like, that uses vocabulary that is scaled according to proficiency levels in the language. So we've picked some target vocabulary items. They will be, a child will indicate their knowledge or lack of knowledge of that picture, of that word, by looking at a set of pictures. It's the same scheme used by the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, if you've ever looked at that. And various derivatives of that instrument. And the plan is we'll start with about 50 words. Those words are based on a person's judgment about levels of difficulty. I've given them some guidance about what types of vocabulary are typically mastered at different age levels or different levels of growth in the development of the language. They're going to build an instrument, a test instrument, using those 50 word items, or maybe somewhere from 50 to 60. And we'll take that data, they'll test it on some children in an experimental way, and we'll condense that down to a finalized list of about 24 words that will serve to provide an adequate measure of a person's proficiency in the language. That's what we did in the Philippines and East Timor. It worked extremely well. The resulting instrument is one that a totally untrained person can apply. In the Philippines or in East Timor, we found we could pick a person off the street and they could administer the instrument. All they have to be able to do is read. Actually, they have to be able to read. They have to be able to put a check mark saying right or wrong. That's about the level of skill that's required to administer the instrument. All of the work goes into its development. Once it's developed, then it's very easy to actually administer, and it doesn't take very much time to administer it. So the developmental process, and this is where the members of the workshop currently are. They are building their word list and they are beginning to collect data. I had a message from one of the participants last night, and she said, we have put our list together, we've chosen our pictures, And we are now beginning to gather data. So once they have the data, then we'll sit down and analyze it and come up with a finalized list of about 20 to 24 words. That's our goal. The picture pages look a little bit like the one in this slide. It contains 6 pictures. If they find these pictures already exist, and I've sent them copies of them. If they find that a picture is inappropriate, they are free to replace it by pasting something over it, or they can take a photograph and paste over it. They can get something off the internet to paste over it. The point is that we need, or we're going to have a panel of pictures, 6 pictures, and one of those pictures will illustrate the word that is being presented to the child. And if they point to or identify the right picture, then that's an indication they understand the word. And if they don't, then they don't understand the word. 2 of the pictures that you see in this particular panel are replacements already. And I decided not to take them off. There are pictures underneath of them actually from the original. What I found is some words just aren't, this was developed in the US. So it was all English based. Some words are just not appropriate. Some pictures are just not appropriate. So those have to be replaced. Some words, they're going to develop an English instrument specific to the Philippines. Some of the words on the English instrument that I sent them are not appropriate. For example, pretty early on the list was the word beaver. Well, most every child in the US knows what a beaver is, or they can probably guess what it is. Nobody in the Philippines knows what a beaver is, unless they have read a book that was printed in the US that's about a beaver. So they said right off the bat, we're going to get rid of that word. Another word that was, and picture that was in the original instrument was a picture of the Taj Mahal. They said, nobody here knows what the Taj Mahal is. We'll get rid of that one. There was another couple of pictures that were culturally specific to the US. One was the Statue of Liberty, which might be known in the Philippines, but it's not as well known there as it is here. So they decided to remove that one, that sort of thing. So they're tasked in. This is a further definition of the levels of development. I'm going to skip that one. Their task then is to take this word list and to begin to apply it. And this lays out the steps of the process. I'm going to start with number 3. They will first have one of the members of the team will be a native speaker of the language. They will initiate a conversation with each child of probably 3 to 5 minutes. And then that child will take the test instrument. And then we'll be able to correlate that child's level of proficiency with their knowledge of individual vocabulary items. And that process leads then to an instrument that has only vocabulary items, but it provides a good reading of the level of proficiency of the child. I pretty well described what's in the instrument, so I'm not going to go through it again. There's a second step to the process. The first process is to try to test a trial list of words. And then the second step will be to do a pilot test of a final instrument. And that will come in the future. Okay, so I just listed, this is the components of the development process. We start with 50 to 60 words, sort of a rough estimate of we can say, well, these words sort of reveal the developmental process of a child's development of the English language. We're going to test those, or they're going to test them with the children there. They will add some words themselves to make the list a little more localized, and they'll translate some of the terms to local languages. But I've told them already, you cannot assume that the list that I gave you, even when translated, reflects the developmental learning process there. That's why we're going through the developmental stage, is to get an idea of what would be an appropriate learning process. They're going to interview 10 children or test 10 children. They're going to test 10 children at each level of proficiency. So they'll test 10 children who are at a 0 level. They'll test 10 children who are at a level 3, 10 children at level 5, etc. And then with that information, we can produce an instrument that will have the desired utilization or ability. Okay, current status is listed on the left is what's already been done. And listed on the right is what we're currently in the process of doing. I said one team has reported that they are developing their word list. Well, they finished that as of this morning, actually. And they have begun the testing process. One of the teams is talking about their word list, and one of the teams hasn't told us where they are. So that's part of the reality of doing a training workshop in this kind of a context. These are some of the issues that we've encountered so far, and this is why I wanted to present this sort of talking about. These are things that you can expect, or there may be other things that happen to you in a training context. The Philippine coordinator, Dr. DJ, is a mover and a shaker. He's got a lot of influence. What worries me is maybe people are participating because of his influence rather than because they want to, or that they really want to make use of the instrument. We'll see. The good thing is he's easy to work with. His English is nearly perfect. The people respect him, and he's prepared to shake trees to make things happen. So we'll see whether it works or not, or whether he's a little too overbearing. The participants are mostly MAs or PhD students. So I'm confident that I'm working with good people. What I'm less certain of is whether they will have the time to actually get the work done. It's not a trivial task that they've been given to do. When I did this in East Timor, it took one guy about a month and a half to do the work. And he was doing it pretty much full time. And it was actually during a time when school was in session, but little was being done in school. The teachers were trying to get the kids organized. So he found it easy to get children to participate. At the end of the school year in the Philippines, it may be a little more difficult, because that's like here, that's when they do their testing. That's when they finish exams and all that sort of thing, all the things that you have to do at the end of the school year. One of the questions I've had, the participants are in the category of what I would call professionals. One of the things I've observed over the past years in contact in the Philippines, sometimes the professionals are not willing to get their hands dirty, doing the dirty work, doing the actual data gathering. They like to talk, and they like to theorize, maybe a little bit less enthusiastic about work. So we'll find out how really committed they are and how willing they are to gather the data. Most of them are younger. This is one of the issues, a training issue. Most of them are younger, so because I'm a little older, I wonder, will they give me any feedback? Will they ask any questions? Will they, even though they have doubts or uncertainties about something that I'm teaching, will they bring it to my attention by asking a question? And actually, I found them to do better than I expected in that regard. They were willing to ask questions. If I said something that didn't make sense to them, they were willing to ask a question or ask for clarification. If I used a word they didn't understand, they would ask me, what do you mean by that? So that worked better than I anticipated in that regard. One of the problems is I don't have any leverage with the participants in the workshop. I'm not there. I have no position in their work world or in the authority world. Actually, neither does Dr. DJ that I referred to. All these people are employed by various institutions. He doesn't work with them. He's not their boss. He's not paying them, so he doesn't have he only has influence. He can talk, he can cajole, he can talk to their bosses. But I don't know how that's gonna work, so we'll find out. Okay, I threw this slide in just because it was cute. And it came from Walt Disney. And it seemed to be useful to the issue at hand. Time is, there's a time to talk, and there's a time to work. And that's where they are now. Now is the time to work. I wrote a little summary. You can read it. The main point here that I'm making is this is a cross-cultural international training relationship or event. I have to make some assumptions. They have to make some assumptions. Our two worlds are different. So I'm never quite certain of whether I'm connecting or whether they're connecting. So we have to sort of negotiate some of those issues. I'm somewhat dependent on their feedback. They're somewhat dependent on me to pay attention to their feedback. So there's a certain element of trust that has to be involved in this type of an event. I'm uncertain that they're all going to follow through because I know that they're all busy. I suspect some of them maybe had their arms twisted to participate. So that's an unknown. I think that's probably pretty much true in just about any international workshop that you do or cross-cultural workshop, that's one of the realities that we have to work through. And it's just one of those challenges of being a part of a workshop in this kind of a context. Okay, that's the last slide. So I've left about 2 minutes, less time than I expected.
7.
Michael.
Yeah, I was really interested when you said you're gonna do this through a lexical inventory. Before you put up any words, I started thinking, oh, I wonder what he's gonna have for verbs. Okay, so I know about Tagalog, I don't speak it, but it's a Philippine type language. And East Timor is also an Austronesian language. So I know something about Austronesian languages. Now, I'm assuming that East Timor is more like Indonesian. Basically, what I want to say, there's no morphology on nouns. You can derive nouns from a verb, okay, but basically, there's no number marker or any morphology on nouns. So when you look at, a noun like boy, girl, whatever, I noticed on your list that there are 6 nouns, and I noticed that there's 1 verb. I'm assuming that the East Timor verb morphology is much like the Indonesian, which is much easier. The Philippine verb morphology is famous, it's very complicated. So the difference between Tagalog and Ilocano and English in East Timor in terms of verb morphology. The other thing is that Tagalog has case marking, and usually you don't get that down in Southern Austronesian languages. Okay, so there's going to be functor words. I mean, how well does one really know a language because you recognize a few nouns versus the ability to actually use a verb with all the intricacies of the verb morphology? The verb morphology, if you can't use that properly in these Philippine type languages, you can't really put a clause together. So that's an interesting problem.
Okay, well, I have an answer, but not a short one. Oh, we don't have too much time. There are, when nouns occur in isolation, they don't always have the morphology. That's what I found in Timor, and I suspect that's what will also be the case in Tagalog or Ilocano. The way the instrument is designed, it is possible to use only nouns, although that's not what I'm encouraging, to measure levels of language proficiency. So the way the process is designed, you compare in a statistical sort of a way levels of language proficiency with knowledge of vocabulary items. So we could have done it entirely with nouns. But I encourage them not to do it entirely with nouns. It worked perfectly well in East Timor. There were no real problems and we got good reliable results. So I'll find out how well it works in the Philippines or whether there are hidden problems that I'm not aware of. Okay, Pete, and
You said that they would test 10 children at each level. How do you know which level they're, that is, do you keep testing until you get 10?
well, you keep testing until you get 10 and then you stop testing. If you get another child at that level and you move on to another child.
Got it, thank you.
So
Now,
related,
we did that in we did that in East Timor, it worked without any problems. You first have to interview a child in order to find out which level they're in before you can administer the word list.
Okay, so how do you, that kind of misunderstanding, so how do you rate this child during the interview?
Well, you're making a cumulative data list. So when you fill up one category with 10 students, you don't, and you interview the 11th child and they are at the same language level. You say, sorry, I need, like, we have enough of you as a bird. And you look for another child with a different level of proficiency. That didn't prove to be at all difficult. Susan?
so following on that, but how are those first language levels determined? So it's not
I,
chicken and egg, right? So it's not, you know, these words, so there you're that four, you're level this and your level this, therefore you.
Yeah.
So how was that first determination made?
in the same way that professional language evaluators make those decisions in a US or a European context. That you have a set of criteria or indicators of the level of proficiency. So a person with, say, a level 4 ability has a list of these abilities or knowledge, level of knowledge. They can handle this level of vocabulary, they can handle these sorts of constructions, etc. So I gave them a list of indicators for each of the levels to refer to. I told them to take the list with them as they interview children in order to make those determinations.
So would that be something akin to an ACTFL language proficiency?
Yeah,
evaluation?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, in fact, I copied that down off the internet of what the indicators were from the IRL or ILR, I forget the name of the acronym. Anyway, there's an international body in the US that has a lengthy list of indicators. In fact, I added to it so that they have a guideline to make use of. That worked in the Philippines, in East Timor. And since I'm dealing with pretty sophisticated people in the Philippines, I'm fairly confident that it will work there also. We'll find out, actually.
Yeah.
That's a part of working in unknown context. You on-the-spot problem solving as you go along.
And Steve, you maybe mentioned it, and I just didn't pick it up. Is there a correlation between some self-reporting evaluation of saying, you could do something, and then the test, to verify that with observable data, and then establishing some type of correlation, like we do in language survey, where we
Yeah,
get the
Well-
reported, yeah.
there is a correlation between a person's language ability and their mastery of various vocabulary items. There's not a very good correlation between a person's self-reported assessment of their ability and their actual ability. And that's the problem. That's the reason why we're doing this. And that they told me right off the bat, they said, we have all these children who come into class and say, I'm a speaker of Tagalog, or I'm a speaker of Ilocano. And they know a few vocabulary items, or they can give you the greetings, but they don't really understand the language. So that's probably why an assessment on an instrument like this is probably useful in that kind of a context.
So when we were doing SRTs, sentence repetition testing, the participants knew that they were going to be tested. And so, but to precede that actual test, we asked them to respond to a few items from the reported proficiency evaluation list. So that kept them honest.
Yeah, there's considerable analogy or analog between the SRT and the reported proficiency evaluation. I think one of the differences is we're just using single word vocabulary items or short phrases rather than a sentence listening task. And it proved to be pretty highly reliable the first time around. So I'm willing to try it a second time.
Make sure you throw in a transitive verb or two, because because all the nouns in Tagalog are case marked, which is something we don't have in English. And if you only get intransitive clauses, they're gonna get that one case marker. But will they get it in the transitive clause?
That'll be something I can take up once I see the list that they have come up with. But the list that you saw on the screen is not the list that I sent. I just made those lists up for lesson purposes. The list that I sent them does have some transitive verbs on it. It also has some adjectives. And unfortunately it has some cultural references that are not useful there. But that I'll keep that in mind when I see the list that they have come up with. Okay, any other questions? Was that a question, Peter?
I'm tickled because I taught survey where you work with adults, and this is trying to come up with similar answers, but with a very different set of restrictions. This is useful.
But in this case, we have to work with children.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who are going to school. It doesn't help us to know what adults know. We need to know what the children know.
Oh, one other thing, you said there were 19 languages they're allowed to be taught in this.
That's what the country Ministry of Education specified. How they arrived at those 19, I don't know. It is the case, however, that the 21 most widely spoken languages make up 95% of the population. So I'm guessing that's how they arrived at that.
I don't doubt that. I'm just really surprised to hear that there are 19 now, because they used to, it was English and Tagalog. So what they're doing for all these other ones, that's crazy.
That's partly why they're satisfied with it.
So in the administering of the instrument, the tool, does the professional, the facilitator, does he read out the word and the child
Yes.
points? So the child isn't reading it, the child is listening.
It's entirely oral in that regard. The test administrator reads the word and the child is asked to point to the picture that best illustrates the meaning of the word.
And there'll be 6 options
Yes,
on each card.
yes,
And then they flip to a different card and
Yes.
do your word.
yeah, yeah.
So does that do enough statistically to rule out?
It worked really
Guesses?
well. It worked well for the picture Peabody vocabulary test, which is a widely used estimate in academia in the US. And it's constructed in the same way, actually, except that they have 4 pictures rather than 6 pictures. It's used in a well-established and respected IQ test in the US. And it worked well for us in East Timor. So I'm reasonably confident that it will work in the Philippines.
And for creating the instrument for each of these languages, so those 10 children in each level, will those 10 come from one classroom, one
No,
context? No,
no.
across,
No, I encourage them to fish pretty widely
yeah,
in putting up their sample.
because I would think that would be affected by if a certain content was just taught here, then they would know all these words, because they just,
Yeah.
last week they talked about biology or whatever.
Well, they're going to be younger children,
Of
older
course.
children.
Yeah.
In fact, some of them will be kindergarten level before they learn to read. Actually, they don't learn to read very well in first grade either. So first, kindergarten, first grade, and I suggest also second grade to get a range of proficiencies and a range of personalities or abilities. And they won't all be from the same school. Like, I recommended at least 3 schools, and I told them 5 or 6 would be even better. But I make my recommendations and they make
Of
the
course.
decision.
Yeah, thank you.
I just got a 5-minute warning that my class is starting. So
Thank you.
that should be the end of the Q&A, but fascinating. and-